before his name echoed across the world. He was just the boy no one listened to. The kid who stuttered in front of the class and cried in secret behind the bathroom door, hoping no one would notice. Delaware, 1,940 seconds. The biting cold of that small industrial town didn't just freeze the sidewalks, it froze the dreams of those born into its harsh rhythm. And in the midst of factory workers, humble families, and unforgiving routines, Joseph Robinette Biden Jr.B. came into the world, just a regular boy from a regular family, carrying an invisible weight that no one could see, a severe stutter that made him feel broken inside. Every word was a battle. Every sentence, a tightrope over humiliation. He tried to speak, but the syllables would catch, tumble, disappear. And the silence that followed, it was more brutal than any laughter. At school, they mocked him. On the streets, he was the punchline. At church, he bowed his head. Joe wasn't just the stuttering kid. He was the invisible one. The child who sat in the back. The boy who tried to disappear. The soul that died a little every time he was asked to speak. But something in him, something deep and unshakable, refused to surrender. One day, staring at his reflection in a school bathroom mirror, his face streaked with tears and shame, Joe made a silent promise to himself. He would not be defined by his pain, even if the world doubted him. He would believe in himself. Even when the words refused to come, he would keep trying. So he started memorizing poems, reciting lines for hours on his own, studying the way great speakers delivered their words. Day after day, he trained not to sound perfect, but to outsmart his brain and give voice to his soul. It was as if the universe was whispering to him, "I don't need you to sound perfect. I need you to speak with purpose, to fight for every word, so that one day you'll know their true worth." His mother, always steady and strong, would tell him, "If you run into a brick wall, break through it." And he carried those words like armor under his skin. Years later, Joe would come to understand the true reason behind his struggle. The stutter wasn't a punishment. It was a calling, a process, a spiritual training ground. It was the universe whispering, "You need to feel the pain of not being heard, so that one day you can become the voice for those who still aren't." That awareness didn't hit all at once. It grew inside him quietly, patiently. He began to challenge himself, volunteering for class presentations, even when his hands trembled, putting himself in situations he knew would likely end in failure. And yes, he failed. More than once, more than a dozen times. But something remarkable began to happen. He wasn't just overcoming the stutter. He was overcoming fear. And that made all the difference. While other kids chased applause, Joe sought understanding. While others tried to impress, he tried to connect. It was in that shaky, uncertain boy that the seed was planted, the seed of a man who would one day change the course of an entire nation. Because instead of trying to silence his pain, he chose to listen to it, to understand it, to transform it. That shyness, that sense of rejection, that lingering shame, it was all serving a deeper purpose. Even though he didn't know it yet, he was being prepared, refined, chosen. Pain became his greatest teacher, silence his sharpest insight. And every single day he felt like giving up, he stood back up, stronger, wiser, more human. He was training for the most unforgiving stage in the world. But he didn't know that yet. Slowly, the stuttering boy who once trembled in front of the class began to transform. The pain hadn't vanished, but he was learning how to use it as fuel. Every morning in front of the mirror became a silent ritual of resistance. Every word that finally made it out was a small victory against fate. And in this almost obsessive quest for self-mastery, Joe Biden discovered a strength he never knew he had: the strength of decision. He decided not to be a victim. He decided not to hide. He decided to face the very thing that once paralyzed him, every single day, until it no longer did. And that decision carved something deep into his soul. He learned that courage isn't the absence of fear. Courage is choosing to keep going even when you're afraid, even when it hurts, even when you're alone. While other teenagers obsessed over parties and popularity, Joe was thinking about politics. He watched the great leaders. He studied their speeches, their values, their presence. He'd read Kennedy's speeches out loud in his room, alone, trying to mimic the rhythm, the power, the conviction. And little by little, the trembling voice began to find its tone. The soul began to speak more clearly. And he started to realize maybe his mission wasn't just to overcome the stutter. Maybe it was to turn his story into a bridge to reach others. The pain was becoming purpose. And even without fame, without money, without applause, he felt something guiding him. As if a force greater than himself was pulling him forward, preparing him, shaping him. That invisible force, some call it luck, others call it destiny, and some call it God. It began to lead his steps. And Joe could feel it, even if he couldn't explain it. It was like every stumble carried meaning, like every humiliation carved into him a rare kind of compassion. Like his soul already knew that one day he wouldn't just carry his own pain, he'd carry the pain of millions. By the time he entered college, Joe was no longer the invisible boy. He still carried wounds, still stumbled sometimes, but there was something different in his eyes now. Presence, conviction, faith. He began getting involved in debates, social movements, student politics. Not because he craved power, but because he craved voice. Not just for himself, but for everyone who had ever been silenced. It was as if every time he walked into a room, he carried a silent message: I know what it feels like to be ignored. And that's exactly why I'll fight, so no one else ever has to be. It was during this phase that Joe Biden started to realize his true power. It wasn't perfect oratory. It wasn't exaggerated charm. It was something much rarer. He was real. And people felt that. They felt the weight of his pain, the truth of his story, the fire of his hunger for justice. And when someone speaks with truth, the world listens. Little by little, he started gaining ground. He earned respect. He found his place. And before he even realized it, he had become a lawyer, married his first great love, Nelia, and was the proud father of 3 children. Everything seemed to be falling into place. He was with the woman he loved. He had healthy kids, a promising career. It felt like, after all those years of internal struggle, he was finally entering a season of light. But the universe, the universe, it still had much bigger and far more painful plans for him. And all the strength Joe had built in childhood, all the courage he'd forged through pain, was about to be tested in ways no man can prepare for, because the darkest chapter of his life was still ahead. And no matter how strong you think you are, no one is ever truly ready to lose everything in a single night. Sometimes life makes it feel like it's finally smiling at you, but in the blink of an eye, everything can change. It was December 1972. Joe Biden had just pulled off one of the most surprising election victories in Delaware's political history. At just 29 years old, he had secured a seat in the U.S. Senate. He was the 6th youngest senator of all time. The impossible had become real, and he was radiant. The campaign had been grueling, but he had won. Beside him was Nelia, his brilliant wife and tireless partner. Together, they dreamed of a new future. That victory wasn't just his. It was theirs. A victory of family, of love, of teamwork. The day after the election, Nelia wrote in her journal, "Now we really are a team. We're ready to begin, but the universe doesn't forgive naive dreams." Just days before Christmas, while Joe was preparing for his new journey in the Senate, Nelia took their 3 children, Bo, Hunter, and little Naomi, out for a drive. She was headed into town to buy a Christmas tree. It was supposed to be a simple day, full of plans, full of joy. But on that road, fate intervened. A truck lost control, and in one brutal instant, Nelia's car was struck. Joe got the call every human being dreads, the one that rips apart the ground, the clock, the heart. His wife and his 1-year-old daughter were gone. His 2 sons were barely alive, hospitalized with severe injuries. The man who had just won a seat in the Senate was now a shattered widower, an emotionally broken father, a human being in ruins. He rushed to the hospital, and there, standing between 2 unconscious sons, in a room that should have held his wife, something inside Joe broke. He didn't cry. He didn't scream. He just froze. The youngest senator in the United States no longer wanted anything. Not power, not prestige, not applause. He wanted to die. Years later, Joe would admit, his voice trembling, "I truly considered ending it all. I thought there was no reason to go on. The world still saw him as a winner. But inside, he was buried beneath rubble of guilt, of pain, of silence. The nights were long and dark. He would sit on the floor of his son's bedroom and cry alone. He questioned God, questioned fate, questioned everything. Why? Why now? Why them? But in the depths of that absolute pain, something unexpected began to rise. The small gestures, the helping hands, the eyes of his sons still fragile, but alive, the invisible warmth of a presence he couldn't explain. It was as if Nelia was still there, as if the daughter he lost now lived inside him, as if even in loss there was meaning. And so, Joe made the hardest decision of his life, to live. Not for himself, but for Bo and Hunter, for Nelia, for Naomi, for every person who had ever lost someone and needed a reason to keep going. He took the Senate oath. At his son's hospital bedside, he swore with one hand on the Constitution, and a heart shattered in the hands of life. And it was like that wounded, broken, but standing, that Joe Biden began his true journey, no longer just as a politician, but as an instrument of empathy, of listening, of struggle, of compassion. The man who had lost everything now carried within him a force that nothing and no one could destroy, and that force would lead him to places he never imagined. Pain changes us. But what we do with that pain, that's what defines who we become. After the tragedy, Joe Biden woke up every morning with a strange feeling, like he had survived his own death. He wasn't the same man anymore. He didn't speak the same. He didn't smile the same. His eyes carried a silence that said more than any speech ever could. But there was something in his heart, something he couldn't explain. A spark that refused to go out. He had to care for his sons. Bo and Hunter were all he had left. 2 little boys, fragile, still trying to understand why mommy and baby sister were never coming back. And for them, Joe chose to go on. Every morning, He boarded a train in Wilmington, Delaware, and made the round trip to Washington, D.C., nearly 4 hours a day. Why? Because he didn't want his sons waking up alone or going to bed without a goodnight kiss. He gave up the perks, the spotlight, the parties, the power dinners, and he chose what truly mattered: presence. For over 30 years, Joe Biden rode that same train. Every single day. Rain or shine, broken or whole. That train became more than just transportation. Between the tracks and the fogged-up windows, he rebuilt his soul. It was as if each journey was a silent prayer. Each station, a metaphor for life. Each round trip, a reminder that what matters most is always closer than we think. While other senators got lost in power games, Joe Biden listened. While they shouted, he observed. While they pointed fingers, he reached out his hand. And that's what began to set him apart. He wasn't just a politician. He was someone who understood pain, felt pain, and knew how to speak to those in pain. Slowly, he became known for his heart, for the way he listened, for the way he looked people in the eye and made them feel seen. This wasn't strategy. It was soul. Even in the most tense Senate sessions, Joe didn't attack. He searched for consensus. He searched for unity. He searched for the middle ground where people could find one another again. And maybe, just maybe, that's what the universe wanted all along, to transform a stuttering, invisible boy into a peacemaker. The train he rode every day became a symbol, a living reminder that politics can still be human, that you can rise to the top without losing your roots, that you can touch people's hearts even in the noise of power. But fate wasn't done with him yet. Years later, Joe would meet a woman who would once again change his life, Jill. A strong woman, gentle, spiritual. She didn't try to erase Nelia's memory. She knew how to honor it, and it was that deep respect for Joe's past that allowed him to open his heart again. They got married in 1977, and in 1981, their daughter Ashley was born. Another chance, another beginning. Within that new family, Joe felt something he hadn't felt in years: hope. And with that feeling, he returned to public life stronger than ever, no longer just a survivor, but a messenger. He began to use his own pain as a tool for empathy. He comforted grieving families, visited hospitals, offered guidance to young people struggling to find their voice, just like he once did. Joe Biden became, without even trying, a symbol of resilience. And with every speech, every gesture, every moment of silence, he conveyed something few leaders ever can: humanity. With Jill by his side, Joe Biden began to breathe again. But breathing is not the same as living in peace. The world of politics, unforgiving, ruthless, has no sympathy for past tragedies. And as his influence in the Senate grew, so did the pressure. The attacks became more personal, the decisions more complex, the mistakes more visible. Joe was a man of principle, but like any human being, he was flawed. And sometimes the unhealed wounds of his past screamed louder than his logic. There were moments when his temper exploded, when he said too much or too soon, when he trusted the wrong people, or hesitated when he should have taken action. One of the most heavily criticized moments of Joe's career came during the 1991 confirmation hearings of Judge Clarence Thomas. At the time, Joe was chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, and he was accused of not doing enough to protect Anita Hill, the woman who had stepped forward with allegations of sexual harassment. Joe tried to remain neutral, but the world demanded clarity. And he didn't deliver it. Years later, he would publicly admit his mistake. I should have done more for her. I should have been stronger. And I'm sorry for that. That ability to take responsibility, even decades later, would become a defining trait of his evolution. But in that moment, the guilt came back to haunt him. Deep down, Joe still carried unresolved wounds, the loss of his first family, the battle with his own stutter, the pressure of being a man of hope when he could barely hold on to any hope himself. He began to question everything. Was he really on the right path? Was he actually helping anyone? Was he still the man Nelia had once loved? At night, riding the train back home, he'd stare out the window and ask himself, what am I doing with my life? Even after rebuilding his family, even as a respected U.S. Senator, Joe felt empty, as if success had no flavor, as if his soul was stuck on autopilot. This time, the breaking point wasn't caused by tragedy, but by weariness, by spiritual disconnection, by the quiet erosion of purpose. And so, he turned once again to the invisible, to what cannot be explained in words, to something greater than titles, politics, or numbers. He began to pray again, not for answers, but for meaning. He started attending Mass more regularly. He read about spirituality, suffering, and forgiveness. In one interview, he confessed, I'm not a perfect man, but I believe in something bigger than myself. And that's what keeps me going. This renewed connection to his spirituality became a turning point. It didn't change his life overnight, but it restored his soul, piece by piece. And it was this new Joe Biden, more mature, more centered, more connected to what truly matters, that the world began to see something different in him. Someone who no longer spoke only about politics, but about healing, reconciliation, service. It was as if, little by little, he was becoming not just a leader, but an emotional guide for a fractured nation. He would still face loss. He would still make mistakes. He would still be criticized. But now, he knew who he was. And more importantly, he knew why he was there. Life sometimes seems to test the human soul to its very limits. And for Joe Biden, the test came again decades after losing his first wife and daughter. His son, Beau, his anchor, his pride, his inspiration, was diagnosed with brain cancer. Beau wasn't just his eldest son. He was his political partner, his trusted advisor, his best friend. When Beau fell ill, Joe felt the ground open beneath his feet once more. Beau's battle with cancer was brutal. Months filled with hope and despair, silent tears and fervent prayers. Joe stayed by his son's side, caring, supporting, suffering in silence. And when Beau passed away in 2015, it was as if a piece of Joe himself had been torn away. But it was precisely in that moment of utter darkness that Joe found the brightest light of his life. He knew he couldn't allow himself to give in, because now he had not only his children and wife, but an entire nation watching him. His pain became fuel. His grief transformed into purpose. Joe Biden was no longer just living his own story of loss and survival. He was becoming the voice of those who suffer, the outstretched hand for those who have lost, the beacon for those who see no way out. In those dark days, he made a vow to himself. He would use his pain to heal the pain of others. And so, a new chapter began in his political and spiritual journey. More than ever, Joe understood that true power wasn't in the title or the influence, but in the ability to touch hearts and bring hope. It was that invisible strength, that deep connection to human suffering, that guided Joe Biden to run for President of the United States. Not as a man seeking glory, but as a man seeking redemption for himself, for his family, for his country. He knew the road would be hard. He knew the criticism would be harsh. He knew he would face battles both inside and out. But he was no longer alone. He carried with him the memory of those he had lost, the strength of the family he had rebuilt, and an unshakable faith in something greater than himself. This was the Joe Biden the world needed to know, a man who learned to transform pain into love, suffering into service, loss into hope. And this story, my friend, was only just beginning. Joe Biden's presidency wasn't simply a political victory. It was a testament to the resilience of the human soul. At one of the most turbulent times in recent American history, his role became something greater than he ever imagined, a guardian of hope amid chaos. When he took office in January 2021, the country was torn apart. The coronavirus pandemic had claimed lives, left entire families grieving, and shattered dreams. The economy was shaking, and the social fabric seemed ripped by conflicts that felt irreconcilable. But Joe, with his calm and steady voice, knew he couldn't offer magic fixes overnight. He understood that healing required something much deeper than decrees and laws. It required true empathy, human connection, and leadership that could give voice to both suffering and hope at the same time. He began listening not just to politicians and experts, but to everyday citizens, those facing unemployment, the loss of loved ones, the uncertainty of the future. He visited hospitals, spoke with grieving families, and talked directly to the workers who kept the country running even during the darkest days of the pandemic. It was a leadership that transcended the traditional. Joe didn't just aim to be a head of state. He sought to be a shepherd of wounded souls. But the path was not easy. Fierce and relentless political opposition attacked every step he took. The media magnified his mistakes and moments of hesitation. Even some of his allies sometimes questioned his slow pace. And the weight of it all often fell on his shoulders, already weary from a lifetime of loss and personal battles. There were nights quiet, heavy nights in the Oval Office, when Joe felt the crushing weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. He felt a cold loneliness, a solitude so deep that only those who carry the world's burdens can truly understand it. But even in those moments of silence and shadow, he never lost his faith. He knew this journey wasn't his alone. It was the journey of millions of Americans and countless souls across the globe who saw in him a symbol of resilience, humanity, and hope. In his quiet prayers, Joe sought strength from a connection beyond words, an invisible spark, a divine light that had always guided his path. It was this unseen power that propelled him forward, even through the fiercest storms. During those difficult months of the mass vaccination campaign, when fear and distrust still gripped so many hearts, Joe reached out with a story only he could tell, a story of loss, love, and hope. He spoke not just about vaccines or policies, but about protecting the ones we cherish most, about the pain he had lived, and the hope that science and unity could bring to a broken world. His voice wasn't just that of a politician, it was the voice of a father, a grandfather, a man who had faced darkness and found a light worth sharing. Yet beyond the public battles, there were private wars waged in silence. The ghosts of loss never truly left him. The absence of Bo, Nelia, and Naomi was a constant presence, a stark reminder of life's harshest truths, even for the strongest among us. These wounds shaped Joe in ways few could understand. They didn't weaken him, far from it. They forged his greatest strength. Every silent tear, every moment of doubt, every sleepless night spent wrestling with the future of a nation, all of it became a wellspring of unyielding courage. Joe Biden was not perfect. He knew that. But he was deeply, profoundly human. And it was this very humanity that connected him to millions of people from every walk of life, every belief, every background. His presidency was defined by that authenticity, a delicate balance of vulnerability and determination that inspired even those who disagreed with his policies. And it was with this raw honesty that he faced global crises, internal conflicts, and towering economic and social challenges. Joe became more than just a political leader. He became a symbol of how pain can be transformed into purpose, failures into lessons, and loss into renewed hope. Looking back over his journey, he understood that every scar, every hardship carried meaning. It was as if life had meticulously prepared each step, leading him to this very moment, ready to lead with an open heart and a clear mind. And that is the message he wants to leave with all of us. Even in the face of our greatest challenges, we can find light, purpose, and strength. True leadership is born from the ability to love, to forgive, and to keep moving forward. Because, in the end, it's not the title or the power that defines a man. It's the soul he carries, the courage to press on when all seems lost. In May 2025, during his final days in the public eye, the world received news that, while deeply concerning, once again revealed Joe Biden's resilience and transparency. At 82 years old, the former president was diagnosed with an aggressive form of prostate cancer, already metastasized to the bones. The diagnosis came after Biden sought medical help for urinary symptoms, and follow-up tests confirmed the severity of the disease, a Gleason score of 9, indicating high-grade cancer. But instead of hiding this truth, Biden chose honesty. In a message shared on social media, he said, "Cancer affects all of us. Like many of you, Jill and I have learned that we are stronger in the hard moments. Thank you for lifting us up with your love and support." This response is no surprise to those who have followed his story. From personal tragedies to political battles, Biden has always faced adversity with courage and empathy. This new chapter in his life is yet another testament to his determination to turn pain into strength and inspiration. The diagnosis also reignited conversations about the health of our leaders and the importance of transparency. Some critics questioned whether the condition existed during his presidency, but experts emphasized that prostate cancer can develop silently, especially in older men, and that U.S. medical guidelines do not recommend routine PSA screenings for men over 70. Regardless of speculation, Biden's focus remains clear: to confront this illness with the same determination that has defined his public life. He and his medical team are carefully considering treatment options, and his message to the public is unwavering: face challenges with honesty, courage, and the support of those around you. Joe Biden's story is a living testament to resilience. Even in the face of devastating diagnoses, he continues to inspire, showing us that true leadership comes not from pretending to be invincible, but from embracing our vulnerabilities and using our struggles to strengthen and unite others. Joe Biden's journey is about far more than politics. It is the story of an ordinary man who refused to be defined by the pain he endured and instead chose to be shaped by the battles he fought. He lost his wife. He lost his daughter. He lost his son. He's stood on the edge of giving up. He's felt the crushing weight of the world resting on his shoulders. And now, once again, he's confronting the fragility of human life, facing a diagnosis that would shake anyone to their core. But he doesn't flinch. Joe meets life the same way he always has, head on. No masks, no excuses. With humility, with faith, with a courage that goes far beyond titles or office. It's that kind of spirit that truly changes the world. Not through the laws written, but through the legacy left. Not through the speeches given, but through the life lived. And maybe, in the end, that's the most powerful message he leaves behind. You don't have to be perfect to be great. You just have to keep going. One step at a time. One day at a time. Even when the pain feels unbearable. Even when everything feels lost. Because as long as there is courage to carry on, There is hope. As long as there is truth in your heart, there is strength. And as long as there is purpose, there is life. Joe Biden isn't just another name in American history. He is a living reminder that all of us, no matter where we come from, have the power to turn pain into purpose and suffering into light. And now I ask you, what will you do with the battles life has placed in your path? Will you let them define you? Or will you, like Joe, use them as fuel to become someone greater than you ever imagined? The choice is yours. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to Success Mindset for more real stories that will reignite your fire within. And remember, behind every hardship, there's always a new version of you waiting to be born.